Okay, it's starting to get cold again, and with energy prices rising by 2% again this October, it might be time to make some simple changes to your boiler to increase its efficiency and to reduce costs this heating season. So in this video, I'm going to talk you through a few changes that could reduce your heating bills by 10% this winter, which for many people could save you 150 quid this year. I don't have a boiler anymore, so later in the video, I'm going to head round to my friend Nikki's house to help her save this winter. But before we get into it, if you find this video at all interesting, why not hit subscribe to see similar videos in the future? Okay, so here's the deal. If you have a combi boiler, which is probably about 18 million homes in the UK, and a combi boiler is one that gives you both heating and hot water from one boiler, and you don't have a water tank, the first step that you can take is to check what we call the boiler flow temperature. This may sound complicated, but for most boilers around the country, you'll see a little knob with a radiator symbol nearby. It might have numbers next to it. It might have some kind of spiral around it. As you move it, you might see numbers change on a digital screen on the boiler. If it doesn't have any of those, then Google your boiler manufacturer and you'll probably find an explanation without too much effort. Whatever it says on the boiler, the flow temperature setting is key to get to using less gas, but staying just as warm by improving your boiler efficiency. What we're trying to do is reduce the temperature that the boiler is heating water to, not the room temperature, the water within the radiator circuit, so that we can take more of the heat out of the exhaust air of the boiler to preheat water coming back to the boiler. Most of the boilers in our homes are what we call condensing boilers, which means that we're trying to condense water vapor from the boiler exhaust. And in condensing that water vapor, we're able to deposit some heat back to be useful by preheating water heading back into the boiler. Many condensing boilers will claim that their efficiency is 97, 98%, but this is only the case if they're at the top of their condensing mode. They're most efficient. If they're not condensing, their efficiency could be 10% lower than what they claim. And that's where we might be able to get the savings. So what are we aiming for? Well, if we can get the return temperature, so the temperature of the water after it's been around the radiator circuit, if we can get that as low as possible, we can extract as much heat as possible from the boiler flue. So we're aiming to get this temperature as a maximum at 55 degrees C, but ideally much lower than 55. And to do that, we can change the settings on that knob on the boiler. And if we set those settings to a figure of 50 degrees C, we would be guaranteeing high efficiency. 55 degrees, pretty much guaranteeing it. 60, probably pretty efficient. 65, maybe efficient. 70, starting to risk a boiler not performing in the manner that it was designed to. And at 80 degrees, we're wasting a huge amount of energy and therefore a huge amount of money. So here's what you should do. You should set it as low as you can. Why not start at 50 degrees and see how you get on? As the weather gets cooler, you might want to up it by 5 degrees. Cooler again, maybe another 5 degrees. And let's try and limit the max that we ever have that flow temperature to 65 degrees at any stage over the winter. In fact, you could use this cheat sheet. So pause it here or screenshot this table as a bit of a guide as to what you might be aiming for over the winter. And if you think you won't remember to change it as temperatures get cooler, maybe just set it at 55 and forget about it. So for October and March, you might set it for 50 degrees. November and February, 55 degrees. December and January, maybe 60 degrees. Something like that. And if you set it up like this, you're likely to be getting the best efficiency out of the system whilst responding to the weather. And if you don't feel the house is warm enough at any stage, don't turn the flow temperature up to 65 or 70. Just leave the heating on that little bit longer. We're basically changing boiler settings to what I call a very simple version of weather compensation, which would mean that we're just providing enough heat and not too much, and doing so at the best efficiency, not wasting gas, not wasting money in the process. And if you were heating at 80 degrees last year and moved to these settings, you might have reduced your bills by 10% without much effort and probably without noticing. And your radiators won't be too hot to touch, and you're likely to experience a more comfortable and a more even level of heat. And I guess let's just be clear, many boiler manufacturers will have different numbers or labels on the dials that sometimes include maybe a little E or a green leaf or a label that says Eco. And that can sometimes be misleading and is sometimes higher than you need it to be. So let's ignore it. The key is seeing how low you can go. And the lower you go, the more the boiler will condense, the more efficient that you'll get it, which means you'll use less gas and you'll get the same heat output. You might notice that the house takes a little bit longer to heat up, and it will. Don't worry too much about extending heating times at these lower temperatures. It will be more efficient to heat in this way. You won't be wasting energy in doing it like this. The next tip that you could do, again for combi boilers, is that other knob on the front of the boiler that controls the hot water. We could reduce the temperature of the water that is provided to our taps. So many combi boilers will be set to give water at above 65 degrees, and when we aren't storing water like this, we don't really need to have it that high. So the HSE advice on hot water is to provide 55 degrees at the taps, which may mean that we can reduce the temperature to 60 degrees at the boiler, or maybe 58, maybe 55. For many, this will still be way too hot to touch, so the lower that you can go, the better the efficiency you'll get out of the boiler and the less gas that you'll burn. I will say that going too low may increase the risk of Legionella growth. So if that's something that you're worried about, it's probably best leaving it at 55 degrees as a floor. Personally, I store hot water in a tank at much lower than this, but more on that later. Okay, both those tips were if you have a combi boiler. If you don't have a combi boiler, you could do something similar and try and reduce the flow temperature of the radiator circuit, but this may also impact on the temperature of the water you're storing, so we need to be careful. If you don't have a combi boiler, you're likely to have a hot water tank to store water throughout the day. And if you do, you could look to do a few different things. And again, Legionella again, the slight warning and caveat is that storing water in a tank at any temperature means that we risk Legionella, even more so than a combi boiler. Legionella is a nasty bacteria that can make us pretty unwell, so we should be careful about this. The closer we store water to 37 degrees or body temperature, the more likely Legionella is to grow. So be careful in lowering the temperature of the water that we're storing too low. But there are a few things that we could do that would be low risk. So if you currently store it at 65 degrees, we could reduce it by a few degrees, maybe to 60. Again, if you're achieving 55 degrees at the taps, that should be okay. If your hot water tank is programmed to be always on, always heating up to 60 whenever you need it, could you change the programming to heat water and to maybe pasteurize the tank once or twice a day? So if we're set at 60, it would raise the temperature to 60 when it's programmed on, and then it might lose a bit of temperature during the day, maybe to 55, maybe to 50, and then raise again when it's programmed to heat water, killing any nasties and still providing hot water as you need it. So my experience is this: we have a tank that's installed alongside our heat pump, and I keep water stored at 48 degrees most of the time, and I lift the temperature occasionally to 60 degrees in the tank to pasteurize the water in that tank. And this means that we're not wasting energy storing at a temperature that we don't use. It means that a heat pump can work much more efficiently, and I hope we're still minimizing the risk of Legionella growth. I haven't tested our water, but I'm happy living with this kind of semi-regular pasteurization of our tank. Okay, that's storing the water, the temperature of the stored water. But another thing about a tank, if you have one, is to ask yourself the question, does my tank and the pipework around it feel warm? If it does, then that could be telling you that you're losing heat that you'd already saved up for a different purpose. So we could look into improving the pipe lagging around the tank or trying to improve the insulation around the tank. If you can stop heat leaving the tank, you can reduce the amount of gas needed to heat it back up every time the hot water is programmed to be on. Okay, that's the theory. I'm going to head round to Nikki's house to make some changes to her boiler settings, particularly for these milder autumn months, that I hope will mean giving her a really high efficiency gas boiler, minimising her gas use, minimising her costs, and most importantly, minimising her emissions. Okay, so I've come round to see my friend's boiler, and this doesn't have knobs to change, but it has some plus and minuses, and it has different modes as well as all the timing stuff that you can see here. So we've got hot water and heating on here, and if you cycle through those, that goes to heating, just hot water only, or off completely, and they're both on. So let's change what we've got. To begin with, this is set at 45 degrees for hot water. I think that's maybe a little bit low, but it means it's working really efficiently. So yeah, I'm happy if other people are happy. So let's change the other one as well. So, and this one is at 55 degrees for heating, which this time of year is likely to be absolutely perfect. If not, could be a little bit lower. So let's leave it like that and see how Nikki gets on. Thanks for watching this far. When I was working with a client with my work hat on this week, I found on a warm day, 4 big heating boilers all running at above 70 degrees. The return temperatures on these boilers was way above 65 degrees, which means that they could be working 10% at least lower efficiency than they were designed to be. And they'd be modulating on and off constantly, reducing their lifespan in the process. So my advice to my client was to enhance the boiler controls to have better control of the flow temperature, as well as adding in weather compensation to those controls to respond to external temperatures. And then also to turn down the boiler flow temperature in a similar manner to what I've described here. A 10% reduction in costs in a commercial setting could make a massive difference to a business and could make a massive difference to energy costs each winter. So if you want to discuss how you might reduce costs and emissions in a commercial setting, then get in touch through sb-energy.co.uk. Okay, and one more thing for you guys that have reached the whole way through this video is an additional challenge this winter to try to pilot, to test whether your house is ready to install a heat pump. So heat pumps on a really cold day might heat water in a radiator circuit to 45 degrees. If you could get your boiler flow temperature down to 45 degrees and heat your house at that level, you could be testing whether a heat pump can operate in your setting. So this winter, this Christmas, this year, let's try and turn even lower than what I've said in this video, down to 45 degrees. Run your heating for as long as you can and see how your house responds, see how warm it is if you do it that manner. You'd be imitating what a heat pump is doing, and you may be proving to yourself, oh, actually, this is a comfortable way to live. Let me know what you think.